Welcome to the show. Actually, this is an interesting opening because you don't know this, and probably the listeners don't know this, but today is the 6th anniversary. It's the 6th birthday of this podcast. So happy birthday
No way.
to it is.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. East is a podcast. It's my little baby show. I raised it from just a baby MP3 into a big MP3 archive. And so yeah, today's the 6th
Very good.
anniversary, and it's been a fun trip. And I thank all the listeners, and I especially thank the guests who have survived episodes with me. Some multiple episodes. Many come back. Maybe you'll be part of this illustrious crew of people who come back to East of the podcast.
Yeah,
Connor,
who knows?
welcome to the show. We had a little bit of chaos, obviously, because this is East of the podcast getting this sorted, but we're here. And congratulations on this book. We're here to talk
Oh,
about.
cheers. Thanks. Yeah.
Iskra, good friends of the show. Everybody buy this book. It's the Lost and Early Writings of James Connolly, 1889 to 1898. So it's a it's a collected editorial work of different writings of his from this period. This is a period that he explained in the introduction, but we'll get into the actual content of the books. But before we talk about this, I want to say that this interview is going to be going to be a derivative of, no, not really, but it's going to be of a kind of bouncing off of the interview you just did with Jay from Millenials or Killing Capitalism. Fantastic, almost 2 hours long. I don't know if it's available on audio yet. Actually, I haven't. I watched the YouTube edition, and extremely informative. And the reason why I'm doing this big, long-winded intro is because you do a great introduction and biography of James Connolly in that episode. And it's fantastic, and it's a kind of sweeping, kind of overview. You've obviously spent a lot of time with this man, with the writings of this man. And actually, I wanted to talk to you about that because it is a kind of this literary enterprise of like collecting a human being in the way you've done. It has its own psychological effects in terms of we tend to create these people in our heads, at least the editors of books like this. I've found over the years of meeting scholars like this, and they're dead. These people are dead, and their historical archive still lives, and you're sort of cleaning up. Anyways, the long way of this is a long way of saying that go listen to that interview or go watch that interview, because I don't want to make Connor go over all that stuff again. Maybe we'll do a little bit of a bio, because we've also done an episode on James Connolly with friend of the show, Chris saying. So you go look those up. There's lots out there, but we wanted to sort of have have a conversation about other things. So welcome to the show after all that long blah blah blah. Welcome to the show, Connor. I'm really excited. Congrats. And
Thank
how
you
do you
very
feel
much.
now that the book is out?
It's a bit of a strange one because I've now kind of moved on to the next volume. So in my head now it's kind of like that's done. So now it's time for kind of volume 2, which is 1898 to 1903. I thought I would give myself a break, but I can't. So it's just like straight back in, So I found two lost letters kind of during the week, so I was very kind of happy there as well. So no, it's going well. But that's it.
Two lost letters you found this
that's
week?
Yeah, two
Oh,
more. So that was for 1898.
where do you find them?
It's mainly true. Um, we're kind of lucky in that a lot of the newspapers have been like digitized. So in terms of like searching, I can do this like really much from home these days. And but so it's basically kind of just knowing which journals he was writing for, and then just kind of keep on kind of plodding away at that, but yeah, but I know that I'm not going to find as much new stuff as I did for this one here, because from 1898 onwards, he has his own newspaper, and once he gets his own kind of newspaper, he pretty much he's printing himself, so he's in control of it then, and that's pretty much the story until his kind of execution in like 1916.
So maybe for people who aren't going to go and listen, although they should, to Jay's episode, maybe you can give us a quick overview of his life and also how you got wrapped up into editor like collecting this and ending up becoming a James Connolly archivist.
Yeah, in terms of the man himself, I mean, he's his position in like Irish history is down to him being one of the leaders of an insurrection that took place in 1916, in Easter 1916, and he was one of the seven uh, like signatories of the Irish kind of proclamation of like independence. There was 6 days of battle. Connolly is injured twice during that. One fairly superficial in his shoulder, and then a much more serious one in the leg, where he couldn't stand. So he was he after 6 days. They kind of surrendered, and the leaders were then kind of executed. And Connolly, he was the last one shot, big, mainly because of his injuries, and he was shot kind of sitting down, so he was in a chair, and that was the 12th of May. But he was also like where he kind of, as I suppose, kind of enters our world in that he wasn't, you know, there was other kind of leaders. So why we just talking about Connolly? The reason being is that he was a Marxist. So he's a Marxist in Ireland in like 1916, and he's forming his own kind of militia, who then take part in what he saw as an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist kind of struggle, and that's where he gets kind of interesting. I think because he's what he brings to the table even now still is that kind of is a kind of his own kind of take and insights on what an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial Marxism really looks like, and when you do read his work, even in the 1890s and the 1900s, you see kind of parallels with other anti-colonial, anti-imperialist kind of Marxists in what is generally known as the global South, mainly from about after the First World War, and most certainly after the kind of Second World War. In terms of some biog, then he's born in Edinburgh in Scotland in 1868. His parents were Irish. Um, his father worked as a street cleaner for the city council. Connolly ends up working in that field himself when he turns about 20 years of age. He marries at the same time. And he gets involved in socialist politics, and not just in Edinburgh, but in England and then in Ireland as well. Um, he's in this process. He's working with his brother John. He was about kind of 6 years older than him. He was also very much a socialist and a Marxist. And yeah, they throw themselves into this. It very much what is now called a working class, organic kind of like intellectual. When his earliest writings are his letters to his future wife in 1889. 1888, 1889. It's hard to tell from the year just how he wrote it. Connolly's writing is is an art in itself to try and kind of decipher. Um, but from his earliest writings, you could see that he's extremely well read. Even in his private letters, he's thrown in quotes from Shakespeare, Walt Whitman, Irish kind of poets, the Bible as well. And I like when reading them. What I like is he's using quotes, but he's getting them sometimes wrong, or it's word too wrong, or phrasing wrong. And I really like that because that shows that it's from memory. He's not just sitting there. It's not some showing off. He's just as he's writing, he just like throws them in. And these are private letters, just him and his future wife. There's no other audience, and it's something that just runs through all of his writings. So he's extremely kind of well read. And when we meet him, he's a fairly staunch, fairly advanced kind of Marxist. The earliest public writing we have from him so far, anyway, is from 1891. He was 23 years of age, and he wrote a letter into the Edinburgh Evening News or Evening Telegraph on what is wealth. There was a big kind of argument about wealth and who makes money and so forth. And he gives in a few hundred words just a classic kind of Marxist take on money, wealth, and labor power, and kind of labor values. So like so like he's in their own kind of study groups, and he's out on the street. He's an agitator. He's trying to raise kind of class kind of consciousness. And if there's one thing that runs through all of his writings, is that everything he wrote, apart from maybe some of his private letters like to his wife, but in every other thing I've read, uh, if it's poems, short stories, plays, articles, it doesn't matter. He's trying to raise class consciousness constantly, constantly, constantly. That's his whole thing. And from a Marxist perspective, so it's all about capital and labor. There's no compromise. Don't fool yourself here. This is about um, agency, as I said there kind of during the week, not just advocacy. So I think, like in terms of why, like in terms of an Irish kind of audience, Connolly is like there's no like he's just Connolly. He's one word in Ireland. That it's like Churchill, or Washington. It's just in Ireland, everyone knows who you're talking about. In in Edinburgh, it was quite interesting. I went to one of his where he used to live or no work, and it's now it's a job agency. And I was taking photographs of the building because this is where kind of James Connolly worked. And he came out and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to, Connolly lived here." And he went, "Who?" And I was so used to just being in Ireland, there's no need to say anything else. So, but for an international audience, I would think that that is probably why he's worth kind of reading. Is that it's not just that he's part of a very interesting history. He's part of the foundation story of the Irish state itself. But he's a Marxist in the global north with what's now known as a global south analysis in terms of it, and that ties into Ireland's history. Something that even Marx and Engels kind of in their later years started to realize. Marx moves, he said famously in a letter in 1868 to Engels, he said, "I used to just see Ireland as it's the garden, it's the pasture for England, but now I'd see that no, Ireland's the key, and to smashing kind of capitalism in like Britain." And because they realized that, like as Engels writes in 1885, Britain is just planting little Irelands all across the world now. It's taken what it's learned in terms of kind of colonial dynamics, and it's kind of refined it. Ireland's our. I always. Have you ever seen Alien 4? Have you Alien
No, I haven't.
Resurrections?
I've only seen the clip of the
No.
baby coming out of the head of the bigger head.
uh I'm a big fan of sci-fi, and I love just using it, but like in like Alien Resurrections, not to give kind of plot away, but I'm making kind of a Ripley's. Ripley is the Sigourney Weaver a character that she plays, and I'm making these kind of replicants of her, but they keep on messing up, and she sees them all, and until they perfected. That was Ireland. Ireland was Britain's sandbox for colonialism.
The
So it's
laboratory of
really,
empire, famously, it's the phrase. Yeah.
yeah, 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 and we can see it because it's where it makes kind of mistakes. It's where it kind of messes up, and also learns how to do things. So so Connolly is what kind of Connolly does, or James Connolly does, is that he's been there's a lot of self training and self kind of skilling that is going on in terms of like Marxism, but then he applies that to the to the to the um to the material a reality of the mode of production in Ireland itself. So he's not looking at what's happening in Manchester and then slapping it on top of Ireland. He's going, no, there's a different kind of dynamic here. This is a kind of colonial mode of like production, which is quite different from a capitalist mode. It's a different kind of element to that. And then out of that comes very particular colonial class relations. And for him, what he kind of really kind of identifies is this intermediary middleman, what we call here in Ireland, Gombian, what Mao and the Chinese Communist Party call kind of compradors. This kind of comprador, a middleman class, he identifies and sees them clearly. So he can see that in terms of Ireland kind of gaining any form of home rule or like independence, watch this class. It's the same as what, like, in the tracks in the Chinese Communist Party in the 1930s, that they're having, and the 1920s, they're having a very open kind of debate about, can you trust the Chinese like middle class in terms of the struggle against like Japan? And Mao argues, well, you can for part of the nationalist kind of a middle class, but you can't trust these compradors because they're just tied in with imperialism. So you can't trust them. You could probably trust the nationalists in terms of up to the fight. After that, we'll see what happens. But in terms of making kind of common cause, we have a common cause with your what's called your native kind of bourgeoisie. That's the phrase that's sometimes used. So, and they go, but the compradors you cannot because they're just tied in with imperialism. Well, in Ireland, of course, like you've had 400, 300 years of this. So you have entire institutions that are reproducing these kind of comprador, middleman, kind of intermediary class relations. It isn't just being passed down through person to person or even through the market. There are structural state kind of institutions that are reproducing these class relations, and they are transferred wholesale over to the new kind of free state. And Connolly was arguing kind of against this in the 1900s. So from a theoretical kind of point of view, I find him kind of quite interesting. He isn't using any of the language because, I mean, this is the first wave of Marxists. Engels is like still alive when Connolly is like writing and it's kind of theorizing what is kind of going on. Engels is still campaigning, so he's part of that kind of, not so much kind of first wave, but he's that kind of generation that were still learning by doing. They were still kind of learning and feeling their way through, and he just applies it to the Irish situation and realizes this is different from the English or the Scottish one even. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, that was great. That sets up a lot of different issues. And I think I really do have to stress to people, like, go and watch this episode you just did with Millennials Killing Capitalism, because it rounds out so much of like this. You just did a kind of telegraphed history of what you sort of, a little bit of what you discussed. I mean, you got into it more in depth, obviously, but I really want to tell people to go and watch that because it was really informative. So where I want to take this conversation is, first, since I have a bona fide James Connolly expert, right in front of me talking to me, I want to get a sense of that, the sort of national question of Ireland, because that becomes let's say, a minefield for him that he has to walk on, that he has to traverse, that a lot of colonized and or sort of decolonized thinkers have to traverse also. So in the way that Ireland is a kind of practice run for British imperialism, that it's also like it can also offer lessons into the history of anti-imperialism, as you sort of make clear, obviously. But there's something else, yeah. But there's something else though, is that this guy also, his own biography is an Irish life, like in the sense that his own personal trajectory of circling the different spheres of the British Empire and its settler colonial, let's say, enclaves. First, obviously born in Scotland, but then, and Scotland is obviously a, integrated, one of the first integrated places of the British Empire. this first chunk of the British Empire, maybe you could say. Maybe Wales, I guess they can have that fight. The Scots and the Welsh can have that fight as who was victimized first by the by the English. But ultimately, like the story here of Ireland is that, yeah, like the miniaturization of of a global imperialist story, right? So like the fundament, I just think of like some, Cromwell goon getting on a boat and like heading over. Like that boat ride is really short, but and then he gonna, going to do violence and burning down like a third of the country. But like that was I guess practice or presaged or whatever you want to say for what they would do is getting on a boat, except they would just go much further. They would go to the Atlantic coast. They would go to India, right? And so like that act of getting on a boat to go do violence to some natives, it's so the Irish experience of that is so close. I guess it's so local, and how it changed over time. And in some ways, by the time that James Connolly comes into existence, is that the Irish, let's say, wing or section of the British Imperial Project is fully sort of in action. Maybe I guess however you want to define that is questionable, right? Because it develops unevenly too. But either way, is that the Irish have already been implicated into this wider British imperial machine. So then you have the situation where an Irish man is born to Irish parents, but in Edinburgh, and then they circulate. His own life circulates between the various corners of this English-speaking world, the U.S. You say he also went to Canada at some point, right? You like, yeah, like ventures or Buffalo is as
He
far north
did,
as
he
he
did.
goes,
So
or he did, yeah,
he went to kind of Canada. So it's the part, like the geography isn't brilliant now, but it's the part that dips down wherever that is. So at least kind of part of it, he was there anyway. He's in the States on a tour in 1902, and he definitely spoke in like Canada because he's been asked to go up, and then then like in the States from 1903 until 1910. And I'm sure that, like, no, his job was, as a speaker, as an activist. So I'm sure that he was going north into Canada then as well, like, so yeah.
yeah. No, and so the question for me is like, yeah, this is his experience is not just Irish in the sense that it's these global wandering people, um, and sort of migrating and circulating in these different parts of the British Empire and beyond as well, but largely sort of focused on the empire. But also, he lived like not just an Irish life, but he lived an Irish proletarian life. Like this guy was a true
Yeah,
like
it's
working
a
class intellectual. Like there's not many of these in the history of
yeah, it's
Marxism.
no, I mean, like, even that point to me, and like we were chatting just prior to starting here, and you had made kind of that point, and it's a fascinating point because it never I never thought of it before, but it's it's actually correct. He did live that typical Irish kind of proletarian life, which is like migration, and it's kind of emigration. I mean, even today, uh, the island of Ireland still has a lower kind of population than before the, the kind of Great Famine. It's the only space in all of Europe that has a lower population now than in 1840. There are less people living here than in 1840, and it's the only place where that is the case. And that's down just to horrendous kind of migration, which is what Ireland is kind of exporting. Like, it's interesting, mentioning kind of Cromwell, because Irish nationalists talk about the 800 years of British kind of oppression, and they go back to 1169. Connolly, of course, it just has no time for that kind of horseshit. What you do see in 1649 is that Ireland's role in this state of England or Britain changes from like Britain is invading kind of Ireland, or trying to get Ireland on board from the 12th century onwards, because it wants to protect its kind of western flank. So it's a defensive kind of colonial setup that has been on. But from Cromwell onwards, it changes to an extractive one. So what you see with kind of Cromwell is rents being paid in cash because these guys who are going to coming over, Cromwell needed to pay off his new model army. They hadn't been paid in like 10 years, so he paid them by invading Ireland and just giving away kind of that land afterwards. But these guys were soldiers; they weren't farmers, so they wanted the rents paid not in work or in through kind of goods, but in the cash form, so that it could be kind of exported over then to England. So you see this highly kind of extractive model starting, and then of course Britain is transforming itself into a kind of capitalist state. So the extraction becomes a capitalist form of kind of of extraction as well. Connolly in Labour and Irish history dates this from Cromwell because he sees that this is what is kind of going on. Um, so it is interesting, like Ireland is this kind of laboratory for for kind of colonialism, but it's also it's a lab in kind of many ways for anti-imperialism, and that's certainly what drew kind of Marx and Engels to devote so much energy to it. I don't think they wrote about any other, maybe the like US, but apart from the US, I don't think, and that was only down to the gig which Marx had for was it the New York Tribune?
Like, yeah, New York Tribune
But
or something. Yeah.
yeah, so apart from that, they were fascinated with Ireland and its role within kind of British kind of capitalism, and it's one of their famous unfinished books is the history of like Ireland, kind of for that reason, Connolly he doesn't take up this bat. It's him and his group have come to this themselves. Those writings on Ireland aren't made public for about another kind of 30, 40 years in terms of Marx and Engels, really. So like, but they're able to take this kind of methodology and then apply it to the lived kind of reality and the historical kind of reality of Ireland itself, and come to very similar kind of conclusions as other anti-imperialist, anti-colonial kind of Marxists in the so-called kind of global South. So for me, that's what's interesting about kind of Connolly, because he's an early kind of prototype of all of this. So he's also kind of doing these things, and he ends his life in a quite bloody anti-imperialist, anti-colonial uprising. Like what I say, like this is like maybe give some background in this kind of this one line that I usually use in talks here in Ireland. But like when that kind of comprador kind of middleman class, their main kind of basis in Ireland then and now would be in things like its cattle, its finance. These are the areas, because these were the ones that were being kind of kind of extracted over then to Britain. And what I say to an Irish kind of audience in terms of trying to raise kind of class kind of consciousness, kind of all these things, is that there were no cattle ranchers in the 1916 rising. So there's always that. Yes, they're working on Bush, working on nationalists, but there were no bankers and there were no kind of cattle ranchers in the GPO, and that was the headquarters in like 1916. But they are all over the treaty negotiations in 1922, which set up the Irish Free State. So you see them in 1922 and in 1923 taking guns off Winston Churchill to fight in the Civil War against those who were anti-treaty. So that's where you see kind of that difference. When Connolly marches into the GPO with kind of Irish kind of nationalism, it's not with the Compradors. They are not there, because why would they? But they are all over the Civil War. They're the ones who are leading it, because they know they want to hang on to this kind of those kind of imperial links for as long as they possibly can.
So I guess what based on what you know, especially obviously you've read his writings probably closer than I would imagine most people on the planet. And so the one thing, and you already comment on the sort of erudition um, and the eloquence and all of that, is that this was a guy who was not, this was not a product of the bourgeois education system. and it says something that like my own bourgeois Western Marxist history is continental, if and maybe a little bit of Chartism and whatever, but it's all continental. It's all like the idea of Marxist theory, and there's a bigger question here about the rise of so-called Western Marxism, um, and like where to put both Connolly and the Irish tradition, because Western Marxism is this neologism created in the second half of the 20th century to be like, we're not those dirty Soviets and we're not the dirty Asiatics. Okay, we are left bank Marxists. Okay, we like our little states, our Western imperial states. We don't want to disrupt the apple cart. And so Connolly is an obvious. I mean, that's me being anti-new left, but we won't get into that. But I think in the sense that like the fact that I think it also says something that Iskra put this book out and not NLR. But we could talk about that somewhere else. But like this is not like the Irish wing of Marxism is definitely not just minimized but erased from the Western Marxist literary or like intellectual tradition. That's just I think that's a fact. I think that's like not maybe I'm just projecting my own Western Marxist, but I never saw Connolly's writings until I was a podcaster. And I was doing Marxism in school because forget the fact that you don't read Mao in grad school in the West, in your Marxist class, in like your Marxist seminar run probably from the English department, which is where most Marxism exists today in a university campus, is that they will probably do way more Frankfurt School than anything really originally written in English, I would say. And if it is written in English, it's probably, like English, I don't know, it's maybe, I don't know what it would be, but it would be kind of new left socialism, maybe like Christopher Hill or something. Like you would get historians typically, but you won't like Connolly is off the map. I mean, maybe it's different now. I mean, it's 20 years ago I was in grad school. God, that's crazy. But to think of how important this figure was, and on top of that is that it opens up all kinds of questions about what the colonial metropole relation is. I mean, in a way, it's almost as if like the relationship between like the U.S. and Israel. This is crazy, but it's like I was thinking about this today, is that how it has this unique definition of colony and metropole, right? Because you can't tell when one starts and the other one ends, right? It's not clean. It's not like Israel is not a clean cut colony of the US, right? And despite what like the right wing anti-imperialists have to say, like the U and some left wing too, like the US isn't controlled by Israel, right? It's not. That's too simplistic. You're like, no, this is like a unique. This is a unique imperial
Yeah.
relationship that has never been seen before. And I would bet that there is no imperial relationship like Ireland and England, insofar as that you have like very little distance, but you also have immense amount of historical distance just in that little ferry ride. I mean, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe you can make that all kinds of analogies around the world, but there is something very unique to the relationship between England and Ireland. That's not, say, first of all, England and Scotland, forget England and Wales, but England and Ireland have a unique, or the British Empire and Ireland. That's probably more correct. The British Empire and Ireland have a unique relationship, and to this day, the role Ireland plays in like the EU, which is now separate from the British Empire, what's left
Oh
of it,
yeah.
is like this is a fascinating, like weird, strange turn
Well,
of
I mean,
events.
yeah. I mean, like on that point, I mean, in the early 1990s, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the kind of Soviet Union, the EU is it's in kind of talks with the former Eastern European bloc kind of countries, and it's telling them, it said, what you need to do is it's telling Hungary and the Czech Republic and so forth, is telling them, and Poland, saying that you need to study Ireland and you need to follow what Ireland is. Right? And people from the Irish government are being brought over to these kind of states and telling them this is how you're to act now, which is basically it's a form. I mean, the EU, it's an imperial project, but it has to. It's it's there's internal kind of colonialism that is kind of going on, and the Irish are kind of quite good at that because of the British kind of experience. So, so they're asking in a very kind of negative way. So it's sort of telling them that you need to be this kind of like you need to build up your kind of comprador kind of relationships and your and those kind of and those kind of institutions, and Ireland will help you on your way. And it doesn't really kind of take off because they don't they still have the even in the 1990s they still have memories of running their own things, but Ireland in like 1922 has had 400 years of this. So that's what I mean by Ireland being a quite old a colonial capitalist state. um what was I going to say? I've lost my train of thought by falling into
I
Eastern
know.
Europe. Sorry.
I know. I tried. I was talking about the unique relationship between British Empire and
Oh
Ireland,
yeah,
and
yeah,
if there's
yeah,
anything
yeah,
that
yeah. I
can
mean,
compare.
yeah. No, no, no. Like there's a great line from the, from the great kind of Irish writer Brendan Behan, and just to kind of paraphrase it, he didn't quite kind of say this, but Ireland and Britain are two countries that are separated by the same language, and and that's kind of that kind of sums it up in like so many ways. They are kind of quite close, but there's a massive kind of difference.
Actually, I mean, this is something that's always I have a I have like a part of my professional life is editing this podcast for the Red Nation, and so obviously settler colonialism. I learn a lot about settler colonialism in my work for them, and we've never done in history. We've never like properly engaged the question of Ireland and settler colonialism because ultimately it it's like it both I mean there's other places where this happened, but it played the role prominently of settler colonial victim, like a victim of settler colonialism, but then also after, let's say, the success of that project, like, and one of the successes of that project was to then export the displaced indigenous people of Ireland, get them to like forget their native language, and then have them do the work of the British Empire, which they did very well in military, administrative, in all kinds of realms. And so this is like, and this shares obviously the story of India too. By the way, like India has this shared history too. That's like, yeah, they're victim and victimizer depending on the settler colonial context.
Yeah, and also just go back to work like to Connolly's like innovation in terms of his of like Marxism back in the 1890s was that um the Irish kind of nationalists love talking about settler kind of colonialism and will do it till the cows come home. Quite you know like quite literally. What they won't talk about is that indigenous comprador middleman class, who are doing quite well out of the empire, but are not part of the settler kind of colonial class. Um, this is so we have both that are being kind of set up here. And Connolly, he's the one who's saying that the ones who are the settler class, which is the unionist class, said that's what they are. So we know what we're dealing with there. The ones who you have to watch out for is this indigenous, so-called indigenous nationalist, pro-imperialist nationalist class who will fight for kind of political kind of independence, but it will not break those kind of economic chains. And Connolly's like line was that if you are a nationalist, an Irish kind of nationalist, it is a scientific necessity for you to be anti-imperialist because the nature of kind of capitalism in Ireland is a colonial capitalist kind of dynamic. So if you want to get rid of the British Empire, then you got to get rid of the British Empire, and that means getting rid of not the trade links, but the very particular a colonial class, those kind of colonial trade links, which is what it was. Ireland is exporting three things to Britain pretty much up until the kind of 1960s. It's live cattle, it's people, and it's savings. Ireland stays part of the sterling area, so bank transfers are quite simple, and it's all like Ireland has its own pound, but it's a bit like, I suppose, the way that in a superficial level, the way that Argentina was there, kind of,
Like
but quite
Canada's
recently in
dollar.
that it was kind of
It's a
tied.
fake dollar. We
Yeah,
know it's a
exactly.
fake
Yeah,
dollar.
it's a fake dollar. Yeah, so there's kind of that kind of going on, so that gives us some insights in terms of the euro in Europe, because we know what it looks like to be nominally politically like independent, but part of an imperial currency, and the whole kind of dynamics that kind of play out there. Like, I mean, just give you just kind of one example. Like in post in the Free State after kind of 1922, in the 1930s, there was move to try and build up indigenous kind of industry in the south of Ireland. Um, it was done quite ad hoc. They couldn't export; it was only for the home market only. But they had some success in terms of building up an indigenous shoe industry, so shoemaking. This is put under severe pressure and all but kind of collapses during the kind of Second World War, because Ireland's getting its leather from England, and England's using all this leather for the war effort for boots. So Ireland's sending over live cattle to England, and then it's buying leather then from them. I mean, it's a classic kind of colonial,
Yeah.
kind of setup.
Dependency.
We're
Yeah, that's
set,
dependency theory. Yeah.
yeah, Ireland sending over this raw kind of material, and then it's been forced to buy they kind of those kind of finished goods. So, and that was up to the 1950s, So, like, even after this thing, and going back then to Connolly, that wasn't your kind of settler kind of that wasn't your settler kind of colonial class that was doing that post independence. It was your comprador middleman, intermediary class who and their links, which was around kind of these things. It was kind of supplying those kind of raw materials in terms of savings, in terms of people, and in terms of cattle.
So
And
I guess,
Conley, he sees this.
I mean, I wonder too, is that like, does Connolly see like what America is when he lives there? Because there is, I wonder too, because I guess this asks a larger question about, an Anglo-Irish, like today we talk about Anglo-Irish, right? Like there was like a class of Anglo-Irish. Like I did part of my dissertation on Mariah Edgeworth, and how influential she was. Yeah, like she was a hugely, for people who don't know, she was a hugely popular writer at the beginning of the 19th century. She was the most popular writer. She was famous for children's stories, and she was a sort of foundational figure. Yeah, she's a foundational figure, but she's an Anglo-Irish. She's a foundational figure of Anglo-Irish culture, right? So Anglo-Irish was also one of the first hyphen in addition to being like a laboratory of empire, but one of the products of that empire, of that being a laboratory, is like one of the first like native settler identities, right? Which is what Anglo-Irish means, right? Is that they're English settlers living on Irish land, and they constitute a class of people. Like this is classic settler colonialism, but in the parlance of like at least 20 years ago literary study, English literary study, it was just a hyphenated identity. These are just Anglo Indians. These are just Anglo Irish. It's like we didn't call them settlers, right? It's because they were born there, right? And they were like born of a culture, right? But that's still settler colonialism. They were there for a while so they can have kids. But like we don't have like a like I'm trying to think of like the Canadian example, right? Like you don't there's no like I guess you could say Métis or something, but like there is no the hyphenated thing doesn't exist. It's just called Canada. It's just called Canadian. Canadian is the name they gave to the conglomeration of cultures and cities, really, that grew out of this settler colonial project that that eventually sought to formalize and a political relationship with the metropole in a way that wasn't a straightforward colony, but an independent so-called like nation state, whatever. So like the language of 19th century nationalism arrives to like the settler colonial project of Canada, 1860s, 1850s, whatever, right? And these ideas take off, and a native class of, I mean, Canada's first prime minister is a Scot, by the way. Like he's a Scot, he's a Scottish guy, not born like the first people, the first like political class of England, of Canada, are all these people born in Scotland, Ireland, England, right? And so like this is so, but they called themselves Canadian. They didn't call themselves Anglo Canadians. They didn't call themselves whatever. Like so, this is an interesting facet of the story of Irish colonialism, and attendant to that is the very successful, unfortunately, erasure of the language. Well, it's not completely successful. It stayed, but in terms of like this is one of the difficulties of talking about decolonization in the Irish context, is that not only are you still intimately bound up with the economies and let's say even militaries and whatever political projects of these colonial powers, but also on top of that, you speak their language, you speak their culture, like you're like, and on top of that, like not only did the Irish learn to speak English and like it became their common language, but they also mastered it in such a way that they became, like some of the best writers of the English language, the canonical figures of English literature. A ton of them are Irish, famously, right? But did we when I learned this stuff, we always learned it as, oh, isn't that a funny quirk of British imperialism? Oh, isn't that so funny? The Irish are some of the best writers. Like it's not like, hey, that's actually settler colonialism, guys. That's how it works. That's the job. It's to create little Englands everywhere you go. Except this was like the most advanced project and earliest, at least, that then informed a whole bunch of histories across the world.
Yeah, it did. I mean, again, just going back to what kind of Connolly kind of brings to the table, because by the time he's writing, um, the 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 kind of dynamic is between those who are looking for some form of like home rule in the UK, and those who don't, and those that don't are mainly in the north of Ireland, and that leads to kind of partition, and then 50 years after that leads to the troubles and to the campaign from 68 until 97, known as the troubles themselves. But what Conley kind of brings to the table, but again, it's like saying that um like you can have kind of all these arguments around settler colonialism, and around Britain being the like enemy, and he's saying that's all true, but in terms of what's coming down the road, watch out for this kind of middle class here. There's a middle class here that is pro nationalist, that is pro independence, and is also and it's also pro imperialist as well. It will not say that it's pro imperialist, but we can see this in terms of its economic links with Britain, and these are completely extractive in terms of, this is not free trade. This is not trade at all. This is a colonial extractive kind of project, on an industrial scale that is going on. So again, like I think that's where his kind of innovation kind of it comes from, is because he's able to identify from a Marxist kind of perspective that class, and put it within a Marxist kind of framework. And I don't know whether he was the first, but he was certainly one of the earliest to do that. And he did it only because he did what Marxists should do, which is to take this wonderful, rich kind of methodology and then apply it to the material kind of reality that you're in order to change it, in order to change that kind of reality.
I mean, I know this is like overly romanticized, especially given the fact that I'm a middle class person and I don't work these kinds of jobs. But I just think of this guy who was like the son like a street sweeper, like, and himself was like a street sweeper, who like helped his parents, like growing up to be one of the foremost Marxists, like thinkers of not just like his country, but like of the region, of the English language. And here we are, like 100 years, almost actually
I would
more than
say
100 years.
so. Yeah. Sorry, I was cutting over you there, Sina. No, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like what you see, what I see from kind of rediscovering his writings, and many of the writings that I did kind of find that were lost. It isn't that earliest period from 1890 up until 1896. I mean, that's the bulk of what I found that was new. But as I'm researching, I'm finding references to speeches and to meetings and to at the minutes of one of the parties, of one of the groups that he was in. They're still kind of in existence. They're from 1891, 1892, 1892, 1893. So he was born in 1868. He's born in 24 to 25. And the minutes of the meetings of that group, it was the Edinburgh branch of the Independent Labour Party. They're still at, they're in the archives. So and it's in kind of Connolly's, kind of script. I'm reading, his handwriting. But what you see is that, yes, Connolly is this. He's quite kind of exceptional. He is very bookish, but there's a whole organic kind of network in terms of kind of education, a working class kind of education anyway. So one of the things which these groups always do is that you pay your subs to be part of the party, but those subs give you access to the reading room, and they always set up a reading room that's open every single night, and use those subs to buy newspapers. Like, I mean, in the minutes of the Irish Socialist Republican Party that he sets up in May 1896, in their minutes they talk about their library and like what's in it, and they're reading, like, they have subscriptions to the U.S. kind of Socialist Party papers, to the Brisbane Worker, so Australia, but also from French ones as well. So they're getting papers from Paris. Connolly uh, could read French. I think I can. I get the sense that, that he taught himself French. When he's in the States in 1904, he teaches himself Italian and becomes quite fluent in it. Ends up translating Italian kind of socialists into English for the People, for the Weekly People, which was the paper of the Socialist Party. So, like, so he had a gift for language anyway. But there's a whole kind of network. So yes, like, working class people aren't going to they aren't staying in school past the age of like 13. But they don't stop reading, and they have their own kind of networks and their own kind of support systems in terms of building up their own kind of intellectual like capacity. And part of that are these meetings and these kind of debates they would pick. Like, one of the things I did find, like, I searched going back to the 1880s in case I could find anything, just any mention of Le Connolly in the 1880s, and I couldn't find anything. But what I did find was advertisements for the weekly Marxist reading group that would meet in kind of Edinburgh every week, and they'd pick a different kind of text, and it was public. The job, it was a book club. Now it's Sally Rooney, or it's someone else, but he was also another kind of Irish Marxist, but like but but they would like pick a text and then read it, and they would pick, like, not just kind of a kind of manifesto. They would pick Capital, and they would read their way through kind of Capital. And this is in the 1880s. So yes, now Connolly, he was, they would kind of slightly kind of rib him in his group because he spent all his time in the library, and even for them, he would pride themselves on their own kind of intellectualism. He was a bit kind of unusual. That is for sure. But I do think that is what kind of highlighting that the working class were able to self-organize their own kind of intellectual, kind of development as well, and that I think is, unfortunately, I think some of that has been lost. Well, actually, no, I'm being unfair. I mean, we can see it now in terms of it's done now via podcasts like through kind of Iskra, so people are still doing that. But that was part of what they were doing then. Sorry, I was again ranting on.
No. This is really good. There's a fantastic quote I wanted to pull up. That's kind of speaks to. It's from Ireland for the Irish, from the labor leader from 1890, from October 10th, 1896. Allow for
Is it
1
from the
month.
book? Is it?
Sorry, yeah, it's from the book. It's page 207. Page 20, yeah, page 206. Where is it?
Okay. Oh yeah, yeah.
Entire screen. What? How come it's not there? Also share. How come I can't see the? That's funny. I can only share my Chrome tabs. Why? How come I can't share something else? Open to share a window. Oh, I see. That's why. Quit. Google Chrome may not be able to record the contents of your until it's quit. No, we're not going to quit. Get out of here. Okay, we're just going to read it. We're going to read it.
Oh no, it's upside down.
Live.
It's backwards.
We'll do it live, like the famous clip from what's his name. We'll do it live. Fuck it, we'll do it live.
Oh yeah, Bill.
Yeah,
what's his
Bill
name?
O'Reilly.
The Bill guy.
Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Fuck it, we'll
Bill
do it
O'Reilly.
live. Okay, I'm gonna read it. So this is from The Lost and Early Writing. This is page 206. Ireland for the Irish is the title of the article. It's from the labor leader. Quote, before the time, it starts with a quote from John Stuart Mill. Before the time of the conquest, the Irish people knew nothing of absolute property in land. The land belonged to the entire sept. The chief was little more than managing member of the association. The feudal idea which came in with the conquest was associated the feudal idea which came in with the conquest was associated with foreign dominion and has never to this day been recognized by moral sentiment of the people. So this is the end of the quote, John Stuart Mill quote. Now this is James Connolly. Actually, you should read it since you have such a beautiful Irish voice. You should read it for us.
Oh God.
In the
first few words of Mr. John Stuart Mill, the impartial student may find the key for unraveling the whole tangled skein of Irish politics. Latter-day politicians, both on the English and Irish side, have done their utmost to familiarise the public mind with the belief that the Irish question arises solely out of the aspirations of the Irish people to have more complete control over the internal administration of the affairs of their country than is possible for them to exercise while the seat of government is located at Westminster, and that therefore some form of local self-government, home rule, is all that is needed to settle this question and lay forever the troubled spirit of Irish discontent. And he basically says after this is that's just horseshit. I mean, that's not because like there's something more kind of going on here. I mean, like it's like the title itself, Ireland for the Irish, just to get, because that's quite a loaded phrase these days in terms of the rise of the far right and the racist. Connolly makes very, very clear in his writings during this period that he actually writes at one point that race is used to divide the working class by the capitalists. They use race to kind of divide us, and we're not to kind of fall into that. It's a phrase which today has more kind of loaded meaning than it would have back then.
Yeah, the same way that nationalism.
But yeah,
nationalism, like back in the 19th century, wasn't the racist white nationalism we see today. It was class. I mean, it was and it wasn't, but it wasn't like what it is now.
Well, I mean, like I could say that, but there was an element to it. I mean, like British kind of nationalism, this is an argument that is still kind of that's ongoing. But like nationalism in the core is a different beast to internationalism in the colonial kind of situation. So even in the 1890s and the 1900s, you had like Ruard kind of Kipling and the white man's burden. and British kind of nationalism was very much based on this kind of a paternalistic view of empire, that Britain was a civilizing presence on all of these poor people all across the world who just don't have the skills to rule themselves, and it's our burden in life to show them how to do it right, how to be a real like democracy. um what Connolly is doing here is something that kind of anti-colonial kind of Marxists have argued pretty much ever since, and certainly all the way through the kind of 20th century, is that um, it is a necessity to be part of any kind of independence struggle if you're anti-imperialist in a colonial setting. You have to. It just kind of demands it. So Connolly is arguing kind of these things, as other kind of anti-colonial kind of Marxists have done since. So like again, that shows us like he's writing those things. He's still in his 20s, and it shows like I think just the richness of his own kind of thought, and his own kind of analysis. That
Can we read
that
sorry to interrupt you, but can we read the
Yeah.
rest? Because he makes that intervention is interesting because he wants to correct it. And actually, if you I wonder if you could switch Palestine into any of these and how it would sound today. Like it would be
Well,
an interesting thought.
yeah. I mean, even down to the Irish kind of war of like independence. You know, I mean, that's an
Yeah,
interesting. There are
exactly.
parallels with that and the Black and Tans and like
No,
Palestine.
I mean, I was
Um,
thinking the reason why one of the things I was thinking about was like, oh, Yahya Sinwar is like one of the James Connolly of our time. He's like, this is like a to think of these two guys side by side, these two martyred leaders
mm,
is I don't know. It was just it's
shot in
affecting me
chairs.
like
Yeah.
his yeah exactly that's true too yeah I didn't even think of that
Mm,
but yeah we should
yeah.
read the rest of that quote.
No, that was picked up. That was picked up in Ireland.
Oh
That was very much
really?
kind of picked up. Yeah, again,
Oh
because of like
wow.
James Connolly, it was like this
Huh.
is this is Kilmainham jail. This is Connolly. Actually,
Wow.
the uh, the official launch of the book is next week, and it's in Kilmainham jail. So
Oh
we're launching
wow. Film You
the
should
book.
film that. Make sure to film that. That would be awesome to
Yeah, we
watch.
film it. So we're launching it in the prison where he was executed. So that's where we're launching the like book. But yeah, I mean, like that's what he argues, because like in this part, like like Ireland for the Irish, that was reprinted as Aaron's Hope, as the pamphlet Aaron's Hope. Again, just showing that Connie wasn't married to this kind of phrase. 1 year later, he prints all these articles as Aaron's Hope. But he argues against that, he says in it that according to this luminous exposition of Irish history, we are to believe that the two nations have for 700 years been engaged in unceasing warfare, that one country, Ireland, has during all that time been compelled to witness the merciless slaughter of our children by pestilence, and the sword, that each succeeding generation has witnessed a renewal of the conflict and a renewal of the martyrdom, until the sensitive mind recoils from a pursuit of Irish history as from a record of a shambles, and all for what? Because previously Irish men and Englishmen could not agree upon the form of political administration best suited for Ireland. So, like, what he's setting up there, I think, anyway, is that, like, again, he's going back to uh, you know that point I made earlier, that kind of intermediary comprador bourgeoisie. They want kind of independence, but they just want their own parliament, and to be able to set their own taxation.
They're like
What they
American
don't want,
colonial. They're like the American independence leaders. It's the same project. Yeah, it's
yeah,
bourgeois national
yeah,
independence is different than proletarian like anti-colonial
mm,
independence. That's the
yeah,
profound difference.
yeah. So it's what kind of Connolly does, not just here, but in Labour in like Irish history, that he starts to work on a year later, He works on it from 1898 until 1910, and then prints it finally in like 1910. But that's what he's arguing, because what Connolly is doing is that he, as a student of history, he realizes that this is a kind of tension that has run through kind of Irish nationalism for the previous kind of 100 years, going back to 1798. There was a pretty violent insurrection against the settler parliament and the British forces in 1798, and that was defeated. And Britain's response was to get rid of the settler kind of parliament and bring Ireland fully into the UK. Just get rid of that kind of settler kind of parliament, because it couldn't do its job anymore. It couldn't hold the country. But what Connolly, like I was saying, is that all these wars and the famine, that wasn't caused by the lack of a political administration. That was because of extractive kind of capitalism. So again, he's like making that argument, or he's building towards the one that if you are a nationalist, you have to be. It is a scientific necessity that you are anti-imperialist and anti-colonial. So in 1896, 1897, 1898, up to 1899, when he's in Dublin, his group is engaged in protests with what are known then as the advanced kind of nationalists. And the advanced kind of nationalists would be ones who understood that there's a social question dynamic to Irish kind of independence, that you have to change the social kind of, and the social and the economic, not just kind of political. So Connolly and Maud Gonne, who you may have kind of come across as the famous muse of W.B. Yeats, they're working together. They write at least one pamphlet kind of together. That's in the book there, and he was quite like they were quite close, and but she's on that advanced kind of nationalist side, and they engage in anti-imperialist kind of protests in Dublin in 1897 and in 1899. So in 1897, it's against the Queen Victoria's kind of Jubilee, and in 1899, it's against the Boer War. So it may seem contradictory that Connolly is protesting against British forces fighting against the Boers, who were a settler colonial class themselves, but how they saw it and how they framed it was that this is a protest against British imperialism. You could make arguments about it. You don't always get to, like, if British imperialism, if American imperialism is fighting against someone who isn't exactly the best, you're still protesting against American kind of imperialism. Certainly outside of that, there was nothing ever to say that they were supportive of the Boers. They were protesting against that, an imperialist kind of act, and stopping Irish troops or Irish people being kind of recruited, or Irish men being recruited to fight in South Africa for kind of Britain. But like what he's organising in is not just about kind of political kind of independence. It's always an anti-imperialist protest. So his nationalism, or his republicanism, as we call it here, has a different meaning, of course, in the US and in Canada. Does kind of republicanism like, what's the take of it in like Canada? It's not seen as the same meaning as kind of US kind of.
No, yeah, because we're not a republic. We're like a constitutional monarchy or whatever. Like
Oh
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
oh
we have
that's
the
right.
stupid
Yeah,
queen
yeah, yeah,
still. Yeah, we have like
yeah.
our we're
So
but
so
yeah.
so you would have a similar kind of understanding of kind of republicanism as we would here then. So yeah, because like it's coming from the same
Our
kind of
money
space,
has
maybe.
the queen on it. Soon the king, I'm guessing. We
King,
have
yeah, yeah.
we're gonna have King Charles on our
It's a
money soon,
king
I
now.
guess. It's so funny. No, but
Yeah, yeah.
we have Queen Elizabeth. We grew up with these. That's the thing. Like I always, I guess I gravitated towards Ireland, studying Ireland for various reasons, but I never, because I didn't frame it around, because I always framed it through the British imperial question and not the settler colonial question, that I didn't see I just saw it as different, say, like administrative histories almost. That okay, they did this in Ireland first, and then they made the move here, and then they did this, and then it was always kind of one thing expanding, as opposed to a sort of settler colonial enterprise that that implicated itself into various different geographic contexts, and and played, and those different sort of, like, those different projects played out differently, and whatever, right? Like I don't know, I lost the forest through the trees, I guess you could say. And even when I thought about the Irish question, it was always just like the Irish national question. How to solve it, how to get independence. Like it was never factored through settler colonialism, through because that's how you get Ireland today, of one of the, it's just, Ryanair and Kerry Gold and a good Celtic Tiger for, transnational capital. A good place to park your assets if you don't want to be in the annoying UK. You can go to Ireland. Like,
Trillions of them. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like a place to wash out your money. So it's this is what happens, obviously, and this is kind of what Connolly warned us of, is that when you don't have the dialectical capital, like Marxist, like understanding of how these social processes work, that you get these nationalist
Yeah,
theories
like
in Ireland who then set up.
you were able to, yeah, and like what kind of Connolly does is that he writes a book. He writes kind of labor in like Irish history, which is probably his most kind of famous work. But what he's doing in that is that there are two words that he uses to that run through his whole kind of his whole analysis, and it's the social question. And what he meant by that, they were very kind of pointed words, because they were his way to link back to this, to highlight that this was a kind of division in Irish kind of republicanism going back to the 1780s, whereby you had this this kind of bourgeoisie who again were pro kind of independence, but didn't want to deal with the social question, and social question was work, wages, um, voting, women's rights, all of these things. Didn't want to touch them kind of, like whatsoever. So when Connolly is talking about this class, he's also trying to like highlight how they were able to transform Irish kind of nationalism from its egalitarian, French-inspired roots in the 1790s to a pretty sectarian, conservative, Catholic nationalism by the 1850s. And during that kind of 70-year kind of period, he writes about that change in like labor and in like Irish history, and saying that what we have now here is a Catholic kind of ruling class in waiting, who are just waiting for this new state to be born, and they will just screw us over. So, but he's also trying to highlight that the arguments he's making in the 1890s had also been made in the 1790s and in the 1820s and in the 1840s, by Wolfe Tone and by James Fintan Lawler and so forth. So he's highlighting that that hidden history, that hidden radical history in like Irish history, in like Irish kind of nationalism itself.
Yeah, and I guess I wonder too if, like, the story of James Connolly and his life is, like, what if someone comes up to you, asks you, like, somebody, say, from like an anti-imperialist from the global south, they find you at a conference and say, "Oh, who's this James Connolly guy? Why should I care?" Like, what do
Mm.
you tell them?
Well, he's a Krabal of the North. He's doing these things. He's like Fanon is probably too much of a cliche. He's more than like Fanon as well. But he's a Marxist intellectual, but he's a revolutionary as well. And that's the thing that I think really gets sidelined, because very few of us are genuine, like like revolutionaries. We will read about it, but he was a revolutionary. He was a Che Guevara. He was those things. He was an intellectual, but he was a revolutionary as well. He was Lenin. He was if it is a fight happening, he's going to be there. He's going to be right in the thick of it. And really, like why we should read him now, like why I kind of read him, or like why I'm engaged in this project, is that um he's a Marxist in the 1900s, telling us something about British kind of imperialism and how kind of British kind of capitalism works. Because if Britain, he's not saying Britain very successfully. If you listen to the British left, if you ever deal with the British left, if you ever kind of have to, God bless you. Just first of all, if you do have to, but like if you do have to deal with them, they still have that very kind of paternalistic view of things, and they do see Ireland as still as a white man's burden. As like, oh well, the Irish, they just can't get it on nationalism like out of their head, but like
They
um
the,
like
the
what kind of
English still use the old cliches of the Irish. Oh, they're so full of life. They're so vivacious. Oh, look at them go dancing away. Like these stereotypes
yeah, they
have
do.
not
Well,
died.
no, no. Well, yeah, it's different ones now than 20 years ago. But what kind of Connolly's bringing to the table is that, like, he's shown us that there's something about capitalism that whereby even the British left will talk about Britain's kind of role in Ireland as trying to keep two warring tribes apart and being a peacemaker, almost like a fucking UN, and you're there going, no, Britain hung on to Ireland and still does, it still hangs on like to the north of Ireland as well, because Ireland is so important to British kind of capitalism, and was at the time, and not so much now maybe, but was for hundreds of years. Again, it was this kind of realization by Marx and Engels around kind of 1870 that really kind of opened their eyes to the possibilities of Ireland being much more than just that white man's burden. It's that there's something else kind of going on here. And how I see it is that if Britain needs, if you have a quasi global south space in the global north next to Britain, that must tell you something about British capitalism. Why did it need it? Why did it need this space there all the time? So again, this kind of opens up to, I would say, and why I kind of read kind of Connolly, and this ties into my own work in terms of, like, my books are all about kind of Irish, about trying to understand actually existing Irish kind of capitalism. That this has lessons for us in terms of understanding the EU, because what the EU wants is to replicate that model where you have so-called global south spaces within the EU. So you see that in terms of Poland and Germany. And what Germany wants is its own Ireland in the form of Poland. Poland has different views on this and is very well aware of what kind of Germany's at, So you have all these tensions in the EU, but what they're doing is that they are looking at what Britain did in terms of Ireland, and they're trying to replicate that or translate it into a 21st century kind of setting, because there's something about what was going on, that there's something more kind of going on in that kind of relationship of Britain and Ireland than just that that kind of um, what is seen as a kind of colonial kind of dynamic. That tells us something about how kind of capitalism works. If it needs something so large and so kind of extractive on its doorstep, um, that must tell us something about its own kind of weakness. And certainly, Marx and Engels saw it as a weakness and said that, and that's why they went from the 1870s onwards, went kind of full out for full Irish kind of independence, because they saw that as a way of tackling a British kind of capitalism. So there's something about how the that weird hybrid semi-colonial Comprador kind of capitalist institutional form that's in Ireland that is being used in some way in terms of the EU itself, as it also tries to build up internal, a, a, well, trying to build up kind of like politically internal colonial dynamics, you know. So we should, like, I once gave a talk in Brussels to the left bloc it was a fringe meeting of the left bloc in the EU Parliament, and you have people from France, Germany, and Greece, and Spain, and so forth there. And I got up and I said, I know what you're thinking. Here's another Irish man talking about colonialism, and they all laughed and said, yeah, we know. I said, what I'm going to say to you now is that we are your future, and you should be very, very worried, because we know what it's like to be nominally independent and part of an imperialist currency, and and being an extractive space while being nominally independent. It says we're your future, and you should be very, very, very fucking worried. And those from the north of Europe all laughed, but the ones in Spain and Greece got it completely. Portugal, Spain, and Greece went, yeah, because they see it. They see what's going on. So, like, I'm amazed how Ireland isn't studied more from a Marxist perspective, because, like, wherever that dynamic is, I argue and I think it's a way to understand what the EU is doing now, because it's learning from Ireland. It's one of the reasons, like, if you go into the EU, the Irish are all over it at the top level in terms of like holding kind of spaces, because they're so good at this. That kind of comprador class is so good at being kind of comprador that they're exporting that into the EU itself. So there are huge lessons. And Connolly, he's our man in the 1900s, telling us about how that class is like formulating. And as Marxists, how we observe, how we're able to understand the mode of production and exchange and the particular class relations that emerge out of that mode is by looking at it from a historical perspective. So we're looking at what Connolly observed in the 1900s, Irish Marxists in the 1930s, like Peadar O'Donnell and like Brian O'Neill, and then our work, like today, we can get a picture of that class and then say, this is not just a quirk of the capitalism. This is something that was fundamental to British kind of capitalism, and maybe, just maybe, it's fundamental to how kind of capitalism works, like even down to the US and Mexico in terms of what's going on there. You know what I mean? Like, there's something about that kind of like dynamic that is fundamental to it. It's the global south is not a geographical space,
It's an economic relation to imperialism. Yeah. Yeah, like because we're tempted to think of it as a geographic
to imperialism. Yeah,
It's that was an excellent explanation. It's late there, Connor. I'm sorry I've kept you late, but this was very good. I do have one final question. I wanted to play this for you. This is something. This was like an amazing TikTok that I came across, and I'm just gonna play it. I'll put it in. I'll put it into the final episode. It's very moving, and it tells. Here we go. I'll just let it play.
We're further around the mountain now, around Sleafmore. I'm going to take you to the deserted village. You can see it from the distance. Not focus on my fingers. Those are the houses. You can see all the fields where they used to be marked out. This was home. Goes around a lot farther than you think. Now the only living things to call this place home are the sheep. I don't think this one's clocked on to the fact that I'm behind it. So this was a house in Donegal, but this would have been a similar state of living as many other people would have found themselves during the famine. People didn't leave all at once. Like a lot of mass displacements and cultural genocides, it was gradual. in the 40s, some of these houses were occupied. But where do you see the view you would have had if you lived here? And people have been living in these mountains for like 6,000 years. Further around that way, there's a megalithic tomb. So the megalithic era, so that's about 6,000 years ago. So definitively, at least for 6,000 years, people called this mountain home. This right here was the doorway to someone's house. This used to be someone's home. And it's not anymore. But look at what views they would have had from here. I'm going to ask you genuinely, see if this was the view from your house, would you ever willingly leave? Or would you only do it because it was that or die? That's my question. And you see these mounds? This is where they used to grow the potatoes. This is where the crop failed. Now, if you know anything about history, you know that it was not that the potatoes were shit. We had a shit harvest, and then we all died because we didn't know how to do any better. We were only allowed to eat potatoes. That was the only crop that we grew we were allowed to eat. There was food being produced in Ireland, but it was being shipped away from here while we were being left to starve. The people who lived here were left to starve. You can kind of see it again, the more mounds of earth with like the irrigation points and everything. This was a perfect place for agriculture. Just with the runoff from the mountain, it was perfect. It was a beautiful home. The houses continue to stretch round this road here and round the mountain. But oh my god. So beautiful. But yeah, so if you were to ask me why I'm pro-Palestine, I'd take you here, I think. Why, if you want to know why people in Ireland care so much, it's because generationally what happened here wasn't that long ago. I knew someone who was older than the partition of Ireland. Like, her parents or grandparents were probably the ones who had to make that decision. I knew people, you know, we all do. And whenever you think about mass displacements, forced famines, people being made to leave their beautiful, beautiful homes, this is all I think of. They wanted the land for themselves, so they took it, and they took out the people with it. They wanted to kill us by any means. Even if our bodies didn't die, they killed our spirit. They tried to kill our Irish spirit, our language, our dance, our flag, all of those symbols of our identity, all of those things. We see the same thing happening again to somebody else across the water. And you know what? Our souls are so intertwined. I care so deeply. Whenever I see people immediately after flattening Gaza, people immediately starting to make mock-ups of beachfront properties on the Gaza Strip, Gaza beachfront houses. All this place has now is Airbnbs. If you can't see the parallels, then honestly, I don't think you can see at all. Come here. Come to the deserted village. Come to Achill Island. And don't just go to the cafes. Don't just go sit on the beach and surf. Actually come look at what was done to this place. The west of Ireland's population still has not recovered from the famine, from the Great Hunger. 1 million fled, 1 million dead. The west of Ireland never recovered. All it became was a tourist destination, and that will not happen to Gaza. Not while we're watching. I don't want to let it happen. So yeah.
Very good. Well, I mean, like on that point, like just to kind of back up kind of what she was saying there. I mean, from 1845. Yeah, all right.
I just think of I don't know. I just think of like some Irish kid, like the 19th century, and like what he looks just like this kid from Gaza now, like starving. Yeah.
Well, I mean, from 1845 until 1851, the kind of population of the island drops from 8 million to about 6 million, and 1 million are estimated to have died, and there's 1 million who are forced then to emigrate. During the same period, the number of heads of cattle and sheep in Ireland increases by 2 million. It's an almost kind of one-to-one thing. So you have an increase of a brutal and vicious transference of the use of land in those kind of 6 years, from one that has people on it in a kind of subsistence kind of living, to one that has cattle and sheep on it as part of a capitalist extractive kind of process. Now, those who were making a living from those cattle and from those sheep, that's your Catholic kind of bourgeoisie on the rise. So they're the ones who end up forming the state in 1922. When I said at the start of this, there was no kind of cattle ranchers in the GPO in 1916, but they're all over the treaty negotiations in 1922. Their base is formed during that period. That's a Catholic middle class who are doing that. And that's the class that the Connolly says you cannot trust them, because they are linked too strongly to the imperialist economic system. The whole basis of their whole culture and their family life is based there on it. And so when you see kind of Gaza now, where you see famine being used as an imperialist tool, a vicious and bloody one that's causing the deaths of thousands. We have been here before, but just to kind of be a bit, just to bring it back to Connolly, is that when that transference happened, when you see that land being changed from one that is subsistence to one that is a cash crop in the form of cattle for export, and sheep then as well, the class that benefits from that are the very class that are calling for kind of political kind of independence 30, 40, 50 years later, but they're not calling for the economic strings to be kind of broken. And that's the class that the Chinese Communist Party identifies in the 1920s, and that others have as well, in terms of every colonial system, every colonial kind of setup has this comprador middleman class kind of kind of dynamic, and they're the ones who you have to kind of watch out for. So yeah, so why Marxists should read kind of Connolly is that he's a pioneer in terms of that way of analyzing a kind of colonial kind of situation, Sorry, that was me being a bit cold from
No,
something that was very kind of
no,
emotional,
no.
but however.
Yeah, no, it's I think I know I'm opening up a can of worms by doing this at the end of this episode, but I think that ultimately a big block to understanding the connection between, say, like West Ireland, like the west of Ireland and Gaza, is the whiteness of Irish. Like the inclusion of Irish among into the history of whiteness. And that I think that confuses people, and I think it throws them off.
It does. It's strange, and even in terms of the protests that are happening um across Europe, and there have been massive, Spain has shown such leadership on this as well. But the difference with Ireland is that Ireland has a very, very small tiny either Arabic or kind of Muslim population. It's an overwhelmingly, and not just kind of Christian, but Catholic, white Catholic uh, population, 80% or so. So it's a significant part of it, and that does throw people, because um, in Italy, the white Catholics are all fucking. Fascism is is back again, baby. In the kind of way, So Ireland is strange for that reason, and it is, yeah, it is down to the history. But at the same time, look at the Irish government, who allow Shannon Airport. Like there are daily kind of reports in the left wing kind of media in Ireland of the number of the amount of Israeli arms that are passing through Shannon Airport in the west of Ireland, which is where it's in the west of Ireland, where the lady was based. And sure, an airport has been used as a space for genocide, with the full kind of compliance of the Irish state. So you have this, even today, this very strong kind of disconnect where you can get onto the streets of Dublin in a population of a city of 1.2 million people. You'll get up to 80,000 people marching for kind of Gaza. It's almost kind of 1 in 10 of the population of the city. If that was London, it'd be 2.6 million people. If that was New York, it'd be 1.2 million people. It's absolutely massive kind of numbers. But the government, because of this, because that's the state that we have, will make all the soundings for Gaza, but will not stop guns in our time, genocide in our time, and will not even stop Irish space being used to kind of facilitate genocide. So we have, yes, we are like to use kind of Connolly and to quote kind of Walt Whitman, we are a mass of kind of contradictions. We contain kind of multitudes, and that's a version there of it. That overwhelmingly where kind of Irish people are is where that lady is, but the state is a comprador state, and they will allow our airports to be used to facilitate genocide in our time. So yeah, these are the issues, in terms of this weird and
And
wonderful
for
island.
people who haven't seen Ireland, you go there and they call it the Emerald Isle for a reason. Like it's just green. It is green. Like your eyes go like blind with all the green that you're seeing. And it's the most beautiful. I
Yeah,
tried to go to Edgeworthstown, but it was too hard to reach for my dissertation. I was ending up doing some stuff in Dublin, but Ireland is so amazing and it's filled with such cool people. And it's crazy to think that it's like 7 million people, the entire country. Like it's tiny. It's like
yeah, it's
it's a
tiny.
city.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like a
tiny.
mid-sized Chinese city.
Mm,
It's the whole population of Ireland. Like it's
yeah, yeah. No, it's two boroughs in like New York. It's like London is like has three and a half
like
times
it's almost what
the kind of population,
60 million
But
in
we all
England or
read,
something like
and we all
that. And
write.
like and it's like it's crazy. And to think the
Yeah.
distance is so little. I mean, this island was depopulated forcefully and then like colonized
Oh,
and
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
recolonized, and even in its decolonization it then was neo-colonized and resulting in the state we have today. That where, I mean, is it just that the kids leave? Is it just that people in their 20s go? Like what happens?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, people go not so much now, but certainly up to the 1990, like during the crash from 2008 until I think 2011. In 3 years, about a quarter of a million Irish people just left the state because that's what you do. So you go to Australia or you go to the
To
States,
recirculate yourself in that British
but
like imperial economic sphere, which has turned into the American economic sphere. Like it's an ongoing history of empire.
it does, but yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah, but yeah, I mean, but it's also it's just it's decades then of that. And again, just going back to again, is that we have an independent state, but it's an independent comprador kind of
Which is like
capitalist
most
state.
states, if
So
it makes you feel any better. That's
it's
what
still
most states
extractive.
look like today. Like the vast majority of states in the world
Well,
are under some kind of American domination, American economic domination. I mean, the UK, I mean, UK is like a vassal state.
it is not. It's not about. Again, it isn't about like it's not. Again, this goes back like to what kind of Connolly brings to the table, is that it's not about a vassal state. It's not even about colonialism. There's no army holding Ireland against its will. So, I mean, this is the key then part of it, is that this as an institutional form, this these kind of class relations have been reproduced institutionally since kind of 1922, with a very strong extractive element there kind of to it. What Ireland trades now is not is really kind of carbon dumping as well. So if you look at in terms of like data centers, the pharmaceutical industry, in the 1960s, when FDI is moving into Ireland, one of the first companies, foreign companies that kind of set up in Ireland are kind of Canadian companies. It's Canadian pharmaceutical companies, because they're able to do in Ireland what was illegal in like Canada in terms of pollution and like so forth. So you have the space being used for something else there. So it was never about like, it's been a long time since, like, it's been like nearly 200 years since the land for Ireland was seen as being for the people of Ireland, or having any kind of form or like function for that, you know. So again, like it's not about whether it makes me feel better or not, or like whether there are other kind of vassal states. For us, for me to like understand the very particular colonial class relations in Ireland, I need to have an understanding of the very particular kind of comprador kind of colonial kind of class relations, and that helps me then understand this state. And I think it does help us then to understand something about kind of capitalism as well.
Conor, thank you very much for this wonderful episode. I've kept you almost for 2 hours.
Okay.
This was fantastic.
Sure,
I learned so
grand.
much.
I've been asking the person then to talk, you know.